everyone, to the Coaching to Flourish podcast. And I'm your host, Rad Anderson, Executive Life Coach and Coach Assessor. And I'm excited to be here with John Andrew Williams, who's the founder of Coach Training EDU. What's the weather like there? I see you, John.
It's glorious. Like, it's just been amazing. Like, day after day. It was rainy a little bit, but it's summertime here, or almost summertime. So it's been a really lovely spring.
And do you feel ready for the summer?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the sprint, the spring sprint to get all the irrigation in order, to get all the plants looking at it. And this is the first summer where or the first spring where I was able to get ahead of it and have everything on irrigation that I want to have on irrigation. We've talked about the systems of irrigation, like the metaphor of a system of irrigation on things. This is the first year where I have it. Like 95% of the things on irrigation. There's just one flower plant that's not. So anyway, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay, so things are flourishing, things that you put in place, so kind of you cultivated things and they're flourishing now. I think that's a great metaphor, isn't it? And talking about kind of cultivating relationships or how we create space, I have some questions today around empathy and also boundaries as well. And the first question is, what is empathy in coaching?
Talking to a friend just yesterday about this, and I came up with, I think, basically one of my most favorite descriptions of what coaching is. And she was asking some questions about, the training, and I described it as, at its core, what life coach training is and does is it trains you to be an empty vessel. It trains you to be so aware of yourself that you can get yourself out of the way. And basically, when you're listening to somebody, you're listening to them without you in the way. That's what life coach training does. It allows you to get to do that active, empathetic listening with confidence that you're actually listening, not listening to your ideas of the person, but you're actually listening to the person. And that's that to me adds essence is what life coaching is about, what the life coach training is about. And it's hard to experience it. It's hard to know what that feels like unless you've experienced it. And then once you experience it, you go, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Because what happens is, I think where people realize, I've been life coach trained now for almost 20 years. And the idea, so we go back to think of the before, it was so much of I am listening so I can respond. I'm listening so I can show up a certain way. I'm listening. It's a lot of listening for the sake of a self-image. Coaching, when you experience that, it's almost like I'm now listening with complete confidence and curiosity. So all of that heavy mental, emotional energy that was going into having to respond a certain way or give advice or relate or whatever is just released. It's just, you let it go. Instead, when you stay curious, you just allow yourself to really listen to the other person without any agenda, without any pushing or without any pulling. You're just listening. And that's enough. That is enough. I had a coaching session today with one of my coaches, and he literally just sat there and listened for 20 minutes while I just boom, downloaded everything. And it was glorious. Like literally 20 minutes, you just sat back and listened. But that's hard to do. It's hard to listen for 20 minutes and stay interested. It wasn't like he just was, he was following. I know he was tracking. And the quality of what came out of my mouth, the quality of my clienting was directly related to his being able to just follow and listen along. And by the end of it, he just had a couple questions. Amazing. Let's that's exactly what we need. Let's go this direction, that direction. Fine. It breaks cycles, breaks the the default cycles that default mental emotional cycles that I might be going through. It was great. And by the end of it, clarity happens, action steps, things, things you move forward in different directions. That to me is what coaching's at its best. And until you experience it, it's hard to know what it's like. But once you experience it, it is so fulfilling. And I do know this is going to be the future of the way human beings impact. This is not just training that's optional. This will be basically, I think there's going to be default training for human beings in the next 20, 30 years.
Listening without an agenda. Um, I just loved how you were sharing, you're just there as that vessel. What tips would you give to coaches who may find themselves uh, in a place of going into sympathy or overuse of empathy?
I don't know. I that's come up recently. Like, what is too much empathy, or is it possible to have too much empathy? I think there was a talk by someone, the IOC or something like that, who I forget his name, but he brands himself as kind of like a counter call, like as a uh, contrarian, like a coaching contrarian to some degree. Like, let me like push against some of like these accepted norms. Like, is there such a thing as too much empathy? I don't know. I mean, I would probably fall in the if I were to choose a side, I would say I don't think there is too much. That is there a thing as too much empathy? Uh, but maybe I'm looking at it not in the correct way, and I'm open to that. And so if someone comes along and says, "No, John, there is such a thing. Like this is how it goes," then I would say, "Okay." But from now, I don't really think there is such a thing as too much empathy. I think that if we're talking about boundaries, what's fascinating, what I find is with more empathy, there's also it, the idea that you can have more boundaries and your boundaries can be sharper and cleaner. It's the same with coaching when there is a lot of empathy from the coach's side delivered to the client. Uh, there is also the ability, there's also the opportunity for the coach to be sharper, to say harder things, to ask pricklier questions, to really get to the heart of matters very quickly in very fierce ways because precisely you are more empathetic. And so I don't see it as an either or. I don't see empathy being, this kind, fuzzy, always, this kind and fuzzy, loving kindness kind of energy. It has that, sure, but it also has a fierceness to it too. And I think as a coach, we get to be both. We have to be both. And empathy allows us to be both. Yeah, that's my take on it. And sympathy, I remember when I was being trained, and they did this exercise where they sat with us down, and they first brought up sympathy, and everyone was thinking, a lot of people in the room going, "Oh, sympathy's amazing. I love being sympathetic." You're going into it, and then they say, "Well, sympathy is junk, and it's bad because you're hooked in." The coach is like, "You're not free. You're feeling the same emotion. You're too tied in." And then all those people just were like, you could feel the crestfallenness of, oh, okay. Like I did not get, and then they introduce empathy, and empathy is just amazing thing. And it is. And I remember having an impact on me thinking, okay, like it's a cute thing. It's a cute exercise. And anyone listening who's gone through a similar exercise know what I'm talking about. From a pure pragmatic standpoint, sympathy is not as useful as empathy because you don't have the flexibility to stay curious as a coach. Sympathy often starts to shut down different options of curiosity. Empathy, if it's used well, keeps those options open. I think there is a place for sympathy in a coaching session where you really feel the same feel as your client, but it's something that you want to move out of quite quickly. I don't see it as something to avoid, like always, but yeah, go there 10, 15 seconds and then leave it. But if you know what you're doing, if you have the self-awareness to know what you're doing, then it's not about you. It's all about your client. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what is the most useful thing for my client? Is it useful for me to be sympathetic? Then be sympathetic. If it's useful to be empathetic, then be empathetic. But the organizing principle of how you show up as a coach should not be what you are comfortable doing as a coach. It needs to be, what is the most useful thing for my client? Full stop. And as long as you're asking yourself that question, you're probably on the path. I mean, you are on the path of aspiring to be an outstanding coach. And it's that's the path. Always to aspire to be better is the idea. And that's the question that gets you there.
What's the most useful thing for my client? And as I was listening to you, it's almost that empathy can be more empowering, and you're coming from that empowering perspective as well. And when you're holding that empathetic space, you are giving that energy of I see you and I feel you, and you being truly present. And I do like the way you also shared that, maybe there are times when that sympathy could be useful, but it's being aware of it, and really thinking about your client and meeting them where they're at. Like you said at the beginning, your coach listened to you like for 20 minutes, is meeting you where you were at. And, I've had clients who they need a sounding board or work with execs, and they just don't have anyone to speak to, and they need to be able to share. Or perhaps it's been a really long time since they did get any form of validation or acknowledgement, or they are the people who are always holding sympathy or empathy for others. And they actually might need it in that moment. So it's being aware, isn't it, of your, as you said, your client's need and what's useful for them.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what if you have a client who themselves is struggling with setting boundaries? What kind of tools would you use?
Curiosity. It's what's the best part of not of those boundaries being fluid. I'd go there first. Like, because so often people will judge themselves harshly for not doing what they feel like they should be doing. And that judgment is very heavy. It's a lot of water to carry. And the beautiful thing about a coaching session is that you get to set that water down for a little bit or even pour it out and have an empty bucket and say, okay, so what else would you put in this bucket? If you put away the judgment of, okay, maybe I'm just bad at setting boundaries. Like I'm going to allow myself to be bad at setting boundaries for this next week. But then go into curiosity about where's that coming from? What's the benefit of it? Where, like, where do you feel safe, or what do you sacrifice? Or you just go into it. You just go, just curiosity is there. And when something is approached from a curious standpoint, it starts to feel like there's an opportunity for learning here. What is that opportunity for learning? And if we're going to come up with some experiments, what would the experiment be? You go into a place and set, where you have to set those boundaries. It's uncomfortable. Setting boundaries is not easy. I think most people think of these things like setting boundaries, being an entrepreneur, you know, staying in a positive perspective, being able to do self care, having all of your finances completely organized, looking at your daily your daily schedule being, reasonable and, kind to yourself and optimized for what you're trying to do for your projects. I think we view these things, I know myself included, as something that should take maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. And then, yeah, I've done it, but really it takes 2 or 3 years. So it's that these things that I know I've seen myself, like I think, okay, I'm still looking at some of the same to-dos as 2 years ago. Thinking, okay, this has been 2 years. I'm still with this. I'm still with it. But to be able to stay with it and go, okay, this thing, which I think should be really easy to do and just be done, is not. That's okay. But then let me continue to work on it. And then what most amazing thing happens in my experience is that just staying with it, and I'm thinking about setting boundaries specifically, is that once you get comfortable with it, it's not a linear benefit. It's an exponential benefit that you start to set a boundary here. It makes your life a little bit easier. So it allows you to set up boundaries. You set another boundary there, and it makes it a little bit easier. You set another boundary, it makes it a little bit easier. And then all of a sudden you think, wow, I really do have control over how my mental, emotional focus of the day is. That's amazing. And when you're entrepreneuring, every disruption costs money. Everything costs money. Every disturbance you want to avoid. And when that starts to become very clear and you can see it in your monthly numbers, then it now becomes a strategic tool. Becomes a tool that informs you of the decisions to make and the boundaries you need to set. And if you're looking at what decision would create the least amount of disturbance, it's a very good benchmark to start asking yourself what boundaries need to be with.
So boundaries can be a strategic tool.
Mhm.
And what about coaches? What if coaches find themselves not setting good boundaries with their clients or the relationship with the client?
It doesn't come up very often. Um, because I feel like coaching, especially, I mean, if you're coaching with people you don't know, but if you're coaching with a friend or a family member, then I do not recommend that. I think that's very hard, very challenging to even set those boundaries. Just don't do it. No. You can have coaching informed conversations for sure. Yeah. But money exchanged, I would- the, I feel like with coaching itself lends itself to its really strong boundaries. I don't do between a coach and a client. The ICF has very clear ethics on this too. Uh, yeah, I don't see it as an issue looking at, unless if it is an issue as a coach, then this is something that as a coach, I would be coached around. Like there's something here for you then, something huge, some insight waiting to happen. And I would not view it as a negative. I would view it just as something to explore. Like there's a huge opportunity for learning here. So let's do it.
So guidance there really for coaches to also lean on
Yeah.
the tools that they've been given and, you know, agreements and designing an alliance and being really clear around communication. And I know when I first started out, I wasn't very great at certain boundaries. I would have clients messaging me a lot in between, sending me messages versus different systems, asking questions. And there are lots that I learned about myself. And the other thing that I realized was that just even tweaking a couple of questions in a coaching session could really shift and put boundaries in place. I
Mhm.
started to shift from asking, um, how can I support you with accountability in between sessions to handing it back? How will you hold yourself accountable? Or what will be our accountability check-in next time? And once again, you learn your clients, don't you? You learn the clients and being curious as to why they might be reaching out or what is missing for them in their support. Yeah, what I learned about myself is also being a core motivation helper. I hadn't been very good in setting boundaries. So being a helper and then having certain values and then feeling guilty when I wasn't helping people, I had to really work on those aspects. I work with my coach on setting those boundaries and where might I be over helping at times as well.
It's cool.
So, how can people continue to honor themselves?
You know, I had a friend, buddy, a couple years ago. Uh, we did. a retreat, with a handful of us. Very intentional time. And he, he turned to me once and he said, you do really, to me, he said, you do a really good job of saying no and in ways, and it struck me at that moment. I was like, and I didn't know how to take it. Is this a compliment? Is this like and I said, yeah, it was meant as a compliment. I took it as such. And I realized even in that space, like it just felt, I wasn't trying to set boundaries or trying to do this. It just felt like there is such a purpose. I have steeped my life in a purpose of trying to revolutionize education through coaching concepts. And I actively think about this every day. And with a purpose driven life, no's are not personal. They're not, and even if it is, it's still, I'm an instrument of this larger mission. I need to honor this instrument. I need to honor this vessel that's trying to accomplish this larger thing. And what this vessel needs is, it needs a no right now for that thing is no. But then, for the sake of the mission. So I feel like if a life, what I've found for myself is if a life is steeped in that purpose, then no's become larger than the person, larger than even the request. It's more like, okay, no, so the mission doesn't require this. Yeah, it's so steeped. It's so in there. It's not even there's no hesitation, you know, no hesitation.
That's a beautiful message, John. And I read somewhere that, no is a complete sentence. That, honoring yourself, you don't have to explain. And I love the way you are talking about, when you are steeped in that deeper sense of purpose. And I've had to say no to many, many things when I was, head down, focused on the mission and with not an intent of purposefully hurting or upsetting anyone, yet honoring that space and setting those boundaries and, moving halfway around the world for purpose has meant I've had to say no to many things in order to say yes to myself.
Right. Right. The thing that helps me the most too is that larger purpose, mission driven, you know, become clear on that mission. It gives such an amazing, so much clarity in that. And then the other thing is this idea of minimizing disturbance. There's a minimizing disturbance. And sometimes that means not rocking the boat. That means just I'm setting a boundary for myself and then just flow away, you know. And other times it means no, I'm going to stand and make a stand and fight for this because I know if I flow away, I'm going to in my back of my mind, it's going to be there. Like this is something that I need to say something. Like, this is now one of those moments that I have to step up and say something. But knowing, like again, going back to wrapping this all up, this idea of if you're asking yourself, what is the most useful thing for my client? Probably on the right path. What is the most useful thing for this mission? Same idea. Do I flow away or do I make a stand?
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful listening to you. So what?
Me too. I just said
So
such a
much
lovely
listening.
space. Like you said, a powerful space. And it's helpful because these ideas I have, and this is a really lovely container in space for me to share a lot of, what I've been into, looking at, playing with. Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm taking away lots of wisdom and nuggets as always. I hope all our listeners are as well. Please send us your questions and keep thinking about how you honor yourself. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Excellent. Thanks.